I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 37, where we're going to discuss Kierkegaard and Kant and why ethics matter, I guess, and see what rabbit trails we can go down from there.
Yeah, why ethics matter. But first, before we get to that, a couple things. You probably notice a little nasally thing going on in my voice. Last week, I thought I had a cold. Turned out that I had COVID. So if the sound quality isn't ideal, it's because Nate and I are once again posting long distance or recording long distance so that I don't spread a virus to Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, I hope I can figure out a better setup so that, like, there's got to be ways, because I've listened to podcasts that, you know, they have someone like even on the phone and it's just this good quality. Although I guess those podcasts make lots of money, so they probably pay a sound technician.
You know, I was thinking about it this morning. Like, you and I have lives outside of this podcast. This podcast is really a hobby for us,
right?
But we take it really seriously too, and it's just. But life happens. It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's just proof that, like, man, if like being a podcaster was my dream, I think it would be different. But it's just something fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
to do with my friend Nate, and like yeah, I don't need to drive down to an hour and a half to Belchertown from Brattleboro, like, to make sure the sound quality's
right
fantastic. And
like you said, if we were professionals, it would be very different, but we'd have a studio and
right. I mean, if perchance it blew up and this is something that became something I could do to supplement or even pay for my family, it's not like I would resist it, but
it's true.
I'm not doing the things that I think you need to do to make that possible.
Yeah.
It would just have to be by chance. Like somebody picked it up and loved it and shared it a million times, and so we'll see. But we're all that to say, for those people who are listening, and there are a few, we're very grateful.
Yeah, definitely. We've gotten some more views on our Facebook page. I don't know if that matters at all, but thanks for checking it out. It's got 2 pictures in one post.
Yeah.
Because again, not professionals.
Nope, not professionals. But speaking of professionals, I blended a really good coffee.
Nice.
That I'm right now.
Mocha Joe's again?
Joe's, because that's what I have at home. So, yeah, I don't know what I'd call it. Let's call it the Kierkegaard blend. Just for the sake.
So I also blended some coffee. I didn't blend it. I got a new flavor of Share coffee. It's their Adventure. It's from Mexico, and it's supposed to taste like marzipan, orange blossom, and pomegranate. So it doesn't taste like happiness this time. So that's
okay.
And it's from Chiapas, Mexico, and the farm is La Plaza y Senta. And it even says the altitude is 5,500 feet. It was picked in March of last year. Yeah, so
wow.
Yeah, they give a lot of information.
That is a lot of information.
But it's delicious. They were out of decaf for Shirley last week, so I got her Amherst coffee decaf, and it's good. But she's like, it's not Share. So I think Share is to us as Mocha Joe's is to you.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to talk about Kierkegaard and his work, his book, one of his early works called Fear and Trembling. and see what rabbit trails that leads to. The last episode we talked about my affinity for existentialism and especially my love for Kierkegaard, who is retroactively considered the first existentialist, although it was Sartre who kind of coined the term almost 2 centuries later. But the influence of the existentialists in the 20th century so clearly come from Kierkegaard that he's often considered the father of existentialism. The irony of that, of course, being that Kierkegaard was a devoted Christian. And I think he might be the only existentialist that is. The others that are in that camp, at least the continental ones, like Nietzsche and Sartre and Camus, all infamously atheists. So I like the irony that the father of existentialism is the only one that is a Christian, and that either tells you that the philosophy is so broad that it almost doesn't refer to anything at all, or maybe it tells you about a certain way to perceive Christianity, or maybe it tells you about other historical things. But anyway, Kierkegaard wrote this book called Fear and Trembling, and it is a meditation on the story of Abraham sacrificing or almost sacrificing Isaac. I think that's a pretty familiar story for most of our audience. It's found in Genesis. God tells Abraham, I want you to take your only son, the one that I promised your progeny would come through, and I want you to take him up the mountain, and I want you to sacrifice him to me. And so Abraham does it, except right before he's about to take his son out with a knife, an angel comes and tells him to stop. That's basically the story. And the book by Kierkegaard, Fear and Trembling, is a meditation on that story. However, the author of the book Fear and Trembling, it is Kierkegaard whose hand put the pen to paper, but he writes under a pseudonym whose name is Johannes de Silentio, which is something that Kierkegaard's earlier career is marked by. All of his works are pseudonyms because he wanted to distance himself from his own thoughts. In other words, he didn't want people to think necessarily that the meditations he was writing down, that every word that he was writing down was what he believed. He wanted people to join him in the contemplation of the things he was writing about. He wasn't necessarily through his synonymous works trying to persuade anybody of any philosophy in particular. And so it's important to know that, because it's important to know that this isn't a didactic or dogmatic project that Kierkegaard is on in Fear and Trembling. It's a thought experiment. So we're free in his mind to disagree with him. Of course, we were already free to disagree with him, but he doesn't care if we do, because you're not disagreeing with him, you're disagreeing with Johannes de Silentio. And I think Kierkegaard doesn't fully agree with Johannes de Silentio, but he does fully disagree with Kant, and so does Johannes de Silentio. And Kierkegaard and his pseudonym are one in that. And that's more to the point, is that it's about being anti-Kantian more than being pro whatever Silentio is saying. And so, having said all that, I'm going to give a quote, then I'm going to let you talk, Nate. I'm going to be done with this lecture, and then we can banter. But I think I've said enough to put the quote in context. It is this: there is no song of lamentations by Abraham. It is human to lament, human to weep with them that weep, but it is greater to believe, more blessed to contemplate the believer. And Silencio is an admirer, enamored with, you might even say obsessed with, Abraham's capacity for faith, more than he is all the speculations and meditations of the philosophers. And I think that's Fear and Trembling in a nutshell, is a guy just saying, while everybody else is over here contemplating the meaning of life or how we should be attacking science or ethics, I'm just going to be over here thinking about the guy that chose to believe God against all of that. And I think that's interesting. So I'll just leave it at that.
So my first thought, just when you were talking about how did the later existentialists become atheists, or, well, Kierkegaard was a Christian. So there was this conversation I had a few years ago with some Christians online. And they were like, well, your atheism couldn't have happened without the Enlightenment, which couldn't have happened without Christianity. So your atheism is really rooted in Christianity. And I was like, okay, but your Christianity is rooted in Catholicism, and your Catholicism is rooted in Judaism, and your Judaism is rooted in, like, this ancient sky god worship. So I was like, just because something evolved from something doesn't mean that, like, ideas and things evolve, and regardless of where their roots are, it for me, it doesn't really matter. You know, like, just because modern Western atheism came from the Enlightenment, which you could say came from the Reformation, like, it doesn't mean that modern atheism has its, like, any hat tip to needs any hat tip to Christianity.
Yeah.
So, like, just because Sartre and Camus and is Gramsci in there? Maybe. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Just because they're also existentialists doesn't mean they need to tip their hat to Christianity just because Kierkegaard was a Christian.
No, I wouldn't say that they were. What I find interesting is how such strange bedfellows meet each other.
Yeah. I mean, it is.
Yeah, it's less like an argument. Like, I wouldn't. If anything, Kierkegaard being in the minority is in terms of, like, because Sartre and Camus, Nietzsche, all atheists, like, they merge their existentialism seamlessly with their atheism. It isn't like a stretch.
Right.
If anything, existentialism in the mouth of Kierkegaard is the stretch. I think that's more like what I was saying. It's like, I think it's harder to be an existentialist and a Christian and maintain that logically than it is to be an atheist and an existentialist.
Yeah, I think so too.
But what's interesting about what you were saying, going back to the Enlightenment, is that the empiricism and rationalism, those, like, two schools that came through or happened during the Enlightenment, were really like on one side. So Kant, who I think is who Kierkegaard is opposing in Fear and Trembling, as opposed to Hume, who we talked about last week. Kant's like, no, maybe we can still have our cake and eat it too. Maybe we can have Christian morals without Christian metaphysics, and so we won't lose our moral bearing in the world. And that was one facet of the Enlightenment. So to think of, like, the entire Enlightenment as being, you know, atheist, but they depend on Christianity or something. It's like, no, actually, Kant is not an atheist. He might be a heretic, but he's not an atheist. Whereas somebody like Hume, is like, well, how do you ground any of this in anything, anyway? And that is the more skeptical, cynical side of the Enlightenment. And again, what I think is interesting about what Kierkegaard's doing is he's forcing this paradox on us by being a Christian who opposes the guy Kant, who's trying to save Christianity from skepticism. Because I think that he sees faith as something that can't be ultimately grounded in reason.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the definition of faith, right?
Yeah,
is I would say believing without evidence.
Right.
Which is where I would oppose Kierkegaard, and I think we talked about how I mostly agree with Hume, disagree with some of his on miracles, but so maybe Abraham had faith. I also think that that's a made up story, that it didn't happen historically for lots of different reasons, not just my atheism. But I think I don't think it's to be applauded that he brought his son up to a mountain to kill him for this God. Even if it was just motivated by faith, which was it, Hebrews 11 is going to say that it was, and I think Paul says it too somewhere. I guess, and that's why probably I'm an empiricist, right? I don't want to believe anything without evidence. And if the evidence, say I believe A because there's some evidence, and then more evidence comes about that shows that that was an incorrect interpretation and B is actually true, I want to leave A and move to B.
Yeah. Yeah, so the thing about this is why the pseudonym, it being a pseudonym, is so important. And why it was so important that I said Kierkegaard doesn't care if you think Silencio is wrong, because he does too. Because the way Silencio relates the story of Abraham isn't even the way that the Bible relates the story. It's so whether or not it's historically accurate or not, it's not even biblically accurate. Silencio adds nuances that aren't in the text, because the question that he wants to ask is, and I think you should think of it as a satire. I think that's the easiest way to think of it. A satire poking fun at Kant. In other words, whatever morality Kant says that he's able to derive from the Bible and then shape into something that's more palatable for modern times, you still have this story in Genesis, amongst other stories in the Bible.
Yeah.
Where God is terrible. And I think it's much better to think about what Kierkegaard's doing here as a satire than it is a satire against Kantianism than it is as a suggestion about how we should actually think about Abraham.
Yeah, see, I can jive with that. Because I think where I think I would more agree with Hume, where he's like, well, it's all you can't get anything. It's all sort of how do you get any ethics or any morals if there's nothing?
Right.
I would even say religious people do that too. No one is following their ancient book to the T.
Right.
I don't even think fundamentalists, and by that I don't mean even necessarily Calvinists. I mean Bob Jones University, fundamentalists have the morals of the Bible, because it's slippery, right? It's as slippery as atheist morals, where you're well, how can you believe that murder is bad if there's no God telling you that murder is bad? I'm well, I can ground it here and here and here, but I guess at the end of the day, ultimately, it's because I don't want to be murdered.
Sure.
So I'm like, it's bad. But I think you can do that with holy text too, right? Like, we're not stoning adulterers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and who wants to do that?
Right.
Like,
I mean,
yeah.
Some people in some other, like, Islamic countries, they do. And they cut off hands and they crucify people. And
Right.
so sort of thank God for the Enlightenment that we're not under the Spanish Inquisition anymore.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. I'm sure you've heard the cliche from Christian apologists. It takes more faith to be an atheist.
Yeah.
I think what Kierkegaard's saying is it takes more faith to be a Christian. I think that's a summary of fear and trembling. And I think that's what he's trying to say. He's like, if we actually think about all the psychological implications, like if we actually take the story literally and think about all the psychological, ethical, theological implications, and we bring it all the way down to that specific day, that day where Abraham, and we imagine that he was a real person, and he had this real encounter with God, and he has to do this thing. What kind of person would do it? You know, like what does that say about what faith really is?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it takes way more faith to be a Christian, honestly. Right? And, like, to go back to, like, what kind of person does that? Like, if I heard an audible voice from God or gods telling me to sacrifice my kid, I'd be like, I think my meds are off. Like, did anyone else hear, like... like, that's a really, really strange thing, and I probably wouldn't do it. Right? Mm-hmm. Although, I mean, there are also people who hear voices of God, and they do murder their family, and we put them in psych wards in jail and realize that they have severe bipolar or schizophrenia or some other neurodivergent / deficient like thing. So so now you take that in modern times, like, God told me to kill my son. Okay, well, we're gonna, like, arrest you, and now you translate it to Abraham's like, maybe he just was psychotic. And by psychotic, I don't mean a psycho. I mean, like, had a psychotic break and believed reality that wasn't actually. And I know that's not the point of Kierkegaard, and we're kind of off topic, but...
Yeah. Well, Silencio, I should say, not necessarily Kierkegaard. Silencio gives these really humorous anecdotes about preachers trying to preach this, and basically having to reduce it to reduce it no matter what to a metaphor for something else, because they can never actually say as preachers that Abraham did a good thing.
See, I don't know. I've heard lots of preachers say he did a good thing.
Well, yeah, you hear him, but what Silencio will point out, you've probably heard the one where, like, God wants you to give your best.
Yeah.
Or something like that. You know, like, or, like, how willing would you be to take, obedience or something like that? But you never imagine that God would ever ask you to take it this far.
Except Jesus says, like, if you don't hate your father and mother, your brothers and sisters, like, you're not worthy to follow me. So I think that's how I would see it relate to the New Testament in preachers.
Right. But what everybody does with those really, really hard texts, every single time, and Silencio points this out, is that's not what it means. So, like, Silencio is like, but what if it is?
Yeah.
Right? That's the thought experiment. But what if we take it strictly for what it is? And what if we said this actually is the story about Abraham and Isaac actually is the definition of the highest kind of faith that can possibly exist. Nate Cartel would say if this is the highest kind of faith that can possibly exist, then the highest kind of faith that can possibly exist is a crime and immoral and horrifying.
Yeah, and possibly driven by severe mental disease, illness rather.
Right.
But I guess I do see your point. Like, there's never been a preacher who's like, now go kill your family. Well, I mean, barring like Bob Jones and David Koresh and some of these people, right, who were like, hey, give your kids the cyanide because it's time. But I think, yes, the average non-cult leader is not going to say, so what you should do is take your kids out to the woods with your your shotgun and some wood and really hope God tells you to stop before you pull the trigger. Right? They are going to use it as a metaphor of like, what's the most precious thing in your life, or what wouldn't you give to God if he asked?
Right.
And even the like, hate your mother and father, like when I've heard that preached, it's like, your love for Jesus must be so great that it looks like all other love is hate. And I'm like, what?
I mean, I think that kind of thing is the problem that Kierkegaard's eventually going to address, but he's doing it in a way that makes it sound like he's on the side of those people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so he's taking it to its absurd end in order to show its absurdity. It's like you can't actually, and this I think applies to philosophy, and that's actually what he's doing. Like, we're talking about crazy fundamentalism in the 20th century. It's particularly American evangelicalism, which I think Kierkegaard has less of an idea about than we give him credit for. Like, I think the more I develop as a person, the more I think of like 21st century American evangelicalism as an outlier and just a very strange way of thinking that harkens ultimately back to Jonathan Edwards, but like Kierkegaard's a Danish Lutheran.
Yeah, I mean,
he's not.
Yeah, it goes beyond before Edwards.
Concept of Edwardianism.
Yeah, I mean, it goes before Edwards though, because the Puritan. I think American evangelicalism is this real weird mashup of Northeast Puritanism mixed with like this early Southern drive to become rich, right? Because when the country was founded, or even before that, like when the colonies, like the South was like the godless, like we're here for money and plantations, and we don't. And there was the North that was settled by the Puritans and the Quakers and the Shakers, and they're like, we want to build a city. Like the first thing that is preached when the Puritans land in Boston is a city on a hill. And like, we want to be a light to the world and show them how Christianity can be. And ultimately they're the ones who kill witches, quote unquote witches. Right. And the South, until I'd have to look, but probably late 1700s, they're like, we don't care. Like, you guys are weird.
Yeah, which makes me think, like, why am I so surprised that, like, nobody cared about Trump's morals? Not to get into politics, but
yeah,
I just very, very quickly made that correlation. In other words, like, at the end of the day, like, religion is the means, something else is the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at least with Trump, they thought he was the means, and the end was more of a Christian theocracy.
Yeah, but even that, I think, is, like, that is a result of propaganda. Like, I think if they were really honest about what, or like, scrupulous, what do you mean, like, Christian nation? What do you actually mean? Like, I feel like there's not a clear, precise idea.
I don't know. I think it means only heterosexual nuclear family marriage. I think it means like conversion therapy is the go-to, like relabel any LGBTQIA is a mental deficiency.
Right. But that's based on a certain. That's based on its own kind of philosophy and worldview that I don't think is that consistent with sound theology. But that's my own take.
Yeah.
In other words, like we talked about in the first episode, I don't think they actually read the Bible. I think if you actually read the Bible, you wouldn't imagine a utopia like that.
I mean, but didn't Augustine and City of God sort of, and maybe that's where it all goes back to, is like this worship of Augustine, and then, and then nothing happens until the Reformation.
Well, it's an eternal, it's what you were saying before though, Nate, like it's an eternal going back. You take any topic and do that.
Yeah.
My original point was that that like we got to be careful in our context of imprinting it on what Kierkegaard's trying to say, because I don't think he's writing with any like real knowledge of like American evangelicalism.
Yeah, although I don't
think he has any perspective on where they're coming from. So when he's talking about like faith and just believing, like he's not talking about anti-intellectualism necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making sense. I guess I think that that's an important point because like contemplating the faith of Abraham as opposed to say that like the reason of Kant. I lost my train of thought here. Yeah, I had something, and then we got on American evangelicalism because I said something about Edwards. I don't think that evangelicals can look at Kierkegaard as a hero, like, or Silencio as a hero, as if he's saying faith is better than reason. I don't think he's ultimately saying faith is better than reason. I think he's saying, look what happens when. This is what I was getting at. Because we were talking about Bob Jones, like when you're zealous for what idealism, and not idealism in the academic sense, but idealism in the common everyday sense. Like if you're like an idealist, you're a purist. Purist is even better, like a believer in a thing. So you got this holy book, and if you're not interpreting it in its purity, you can only interpret it in its purity if you're interpreting it literally. And this kind of piety and zealousness for real, true. We're the true Christians. We're the real Christians. We're the most faithful ones. Because we're willing to go this far. I think you should read Fear and Trembling as a warning against those impulses in humanity, not as an encouragement of them. I don't think Kierkegaard would have you look at Silencio as like some kind of hero because of his admiration for Abraham. I think he'd rather you go, okay, so this idealism and extremism. Wow, that's really extreme.
Yeah.
Right? Like the 20th century bears that out in Europe. So just get away from America, like in Europe. the two world wars fought between extreme far right and extreme far left ideologies, and just the Allies caught in the middle trying to prevent the world from going nuts. But it's based on people that were like, no, we're faithful to the cause. Like, we're true blue believers. And I'm just saying, maybe being a skeptic and and not needing to ground it in a categorical imperative, but just being constantly a skeptic, somebody who's questioning and wondering, is a safe place to be.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah, it's just, I think the question is less, how do we be more like Abraham? And more is is the realist, like, is faith always a good thing, or is there a level at which it becomes dangerous?
See, and this is where I think it, at any level, is dangerous. And I know that there's like the Christian apologists who aren't even saying that, you know, atheism takes more faith, but they're going to say, like, you know, to get to 2 + 2 = 4, you have to have faith in mathematics, or you have to have, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you if you're going to change the definition of faith from what the Bible says, then potentially. But, like, you know, very clearly in Hebrews 11, right? Or Hebrews 12, like, faith is the belief of the things unseen. Like, I can show you that 2 + 2 = 4 without any higher level mathematics. It's even better when you know set theory in some of these higher level things. But, like, you don't... So, and the reason I would say that any faith is dangerous is because then you can be... Maybe what you have faith in initially makes sense and maybe could be proved, but you're not willing to put in the mental energy, or you just believe someone who told you. But the people who found their life on faith, in my experience, tend to go on to believe other ridiculous, dangerous things. And one of, like, aliens built the, you know, I'm going to even get off Christianity. Like, aliens built the pyramids. QAnon is real. Chemtrails are real. Like, it was an inside job for 9/11. Like, all of these things are taken by faith, and I'm like, that's really dangerous. And even comically more, I don't know about your Facebook feed, but mine, like, I have no friends on it anymore, and I don't know if they, like, blocked me or whatever, but it's like the news things that I subscribe to, but more and more Facebook is giving me, like, these other things that they think I might be interested in. Yeah. And I pause and read some of them, which probably tells their algorithm that I am. But there's, like, I'm getting Christian creationist stuff, and maybe it's because I watch some of the counter apologetics on YouTube. Yeah. But, like, they're showing this, like, fossil of a human foot over a dinosaur foot, fossilized, which proves that, you know, humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. And when you actually do your digging, it turns out that the guy who found it is a complete scoundrel con artist, and this thing's been debunked, right? But they're posting this on Facebook, and there's like 10,000 like yes and amen and praise the Lord, and I knew there'd be... And I'm like, that's not... Like, you've just put your faith into this other thing that has been verifiably shown to be false. So what else are you going to put your faith in, right? I mean, that's how you get... It's how you get... Koresh and, like, the what was the cult that they all killed themselves when Halley's Comet passed, right? And they were all wearing, like...
Was that Hale-Bop or whatever?
Yeah, not Mbop.
I think that was the Comet.
Yes.
I don't remember the name of the cult.
Right, but, like, they all, like...
They all drink Kool-Aid. That's where we got that phrase from.
No. Kool-Aid was from I already said it. He went to Guyana. He was...
Okay. Jim Jones?
Yeah, Jim Jones. He was, like, legit. They put cyanide in the Kool-Aid and were like, drink it.
Yeah.
And then the people who didn't have enough faith, they just shot. So, like, But they like had their parents give it to their kids, and then had the parents drink it, and it's horrifying. But yeah, the other one, I don't know what they did, but maybe it was sleeping pills or something. They all went to bed wearing like a jogger outfit and special Reebok / Converse shoes that had. I'm just like, dude, that's like all of that is based on faith, and I'm like, can we just not have faith?
Huh. Well, I think we've talked about this before, but the reason I keep saying "huh" is that I don't see it as pure faith. I mean, I accept your definition, like in terms of we're going to believe what we're going to believe, and we're never ever going to accept your evidence because we've already decided what we believe. So, like, our entire evidence I put in quotations, is just confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
And it's not even good evidence. But the thing is like, to me, faith is, and I'm not even saying I have it. I'm not, by giving this definition, I'm not saying I subscribe that this is the kind of faith I have. But I'm saying this is what I think faith is ultimately it's blind and self-justifying, so that it doesn't even have the impulse to prove to anybody that it's true.
So, just to pivot off that, would you then say that someone like, oh gosh, who created the Ark Encounter? Ken Ham has less faith because he's constantly trying to prove his literal reading of a 6,000-year-old, right? So like, so it's like, yeah. It's sort of not mysterious. He's trying to ground it in rationality and evidence. And so would that be like, does that take less faith?
I don't know that it takes less faith. It's certainly intellectually dishonest, for one. But I'm intrigued by the impulse to prove it, to debate with a scientist, because you're tacitly admitting, by Ken Ham debating with Bill Nye, Ken Ham is tacitly admitting that he believes in empirical evidence and that he believes in reason. But if he believed in empirical evidence and he believed in reason, he wouldn't be a creationist.
Yes. Well, and at the end of that debate, I don't know if you watched it. I think we talked about how that was like the epiphany moment for me where I ended up losing my faith. But at the end of the debate, the moderator asked, like, Bill Nye, what would it take for you to change your opinion? And he said, better evidence. And they asked Ken Ham, what would it take for you to change your position? And he said, nothing.
Right.
So, like,
that was the only time that he was honest.
I mean, I think he is willfully deluded in that the evidence presented, you know, he has to do 1,000 backbends to make it work. But I don't know if he's dishonest in the fact that he doesn't believe it. Maybe he doesn't.
Yeah, I think he truly believes it. Yeah. When I say dishonest, I probably just mean deluded by his own confirmation bias, which is a psychological defense mechanism.
Yeah.
But like, my point is, and I think Silencio's point is, comes full circle here. You really want to talk about faith. Like, you really want to talk about faith, not confirmation bias, not manipulating evidence, not dogma, not doctrines. You really want to talk about faith. Then true faith looks reason and evidence in the face and says, you don't matter. I don't need you. I heard a voice. It said, kill your son. I did it. And I mean, I think that it's actually a tip of the cap to reason and evidence, because there's almost this, it's impulsive, compulsive, maybe even, for human beings to ground the things that they say in something, anything. Even if you say the Bible says, it's still something.
Right.
Nobody just goes, Camus tried. Like, I'm an absurdist. I just do things. But why? And the fact that you can't escape that question is why, I don't know, it's why philosophy exists at all. It's why human history existed, because we woke up one day and we were like, why?
Yeah.
And I don't think the question goes away.
So I think
even if AI takes over, I think they just take our question with them. Why?
That's possible. I think I finally, after 45 minutes of discussion, I think I finally understand that, yeah, like, if it's a satire and a critique, because you're looking at these two options, like, one is have a little bit of evidence and think about a little bit of things rationally, and the other is, like, do whatever voice tells you. Like, it's absurdist to do the former or the latter. Right?
Yeah.
Like, so, yeah, like, if the natural... So you need a little bit of reason, I guess. Maybe that's what Kierkegaard's saying. That, like, when you take this faith of Abraham to its logical extreme, no one wants it. So maybe we should back off on other things that we take to...
Maybe, but I think it's deeper than that. I think it's trying to expose the silliness of Kant's categorical imperative. Not the silliness of it, the weakness of it.
The impossibility, maybe.
Not necessarily the impossibility, but just, like, why do you need to have a categorical imperative? It isn't a rational need. It's a psychological, evolutionary need.
Yeah.
It's not what you say it is. It's not metaphysical. It's not real. It doesn't have any substance. Which is why Kierkegaard's called an existentialist, because once you're like that, the philosophical questions about meaning aren't real.
Right.
And they don't have any substance. You just fling the door wide open to be like, well, I guess there's no meaning.
Right. Yeah.
But you also and this is actually what I think Kierkegaard is doing. So yeah, he's flung the door wide open for guys like Sartre and Camus to be like, create your own meaning. And I think if he were having conversations with them now, he'd be like, crap. Dang it. You took it there. But I think what he's saying is, okay, that's one door you could walk through. Or we could begin to begin to understand what Christianity really is without the masks and chains and veils of 1800 years of European philosophy and culture. You could begin to contemplate what Jesus and Paul were really trying to get at. And it's not being filtered through anything you currently need. that's ultimately, I think, what Kierkegaard wants to do, is like push down those sort of philosophical barriers. So eventually, in his works that he puts his name on, he can say, this is what the faith is. Now take it or leave it. and if you leave it, that's fine. I don't blame you. You live in 19 whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you live in 18 whatever. Like, if you're a modern person, if you leave it, like, that's fine. But don't say that it is what it isn't. Don't say it's something it's not. Don't think you can blend it with Kantianism or whatever. There's no other ism that's like a version of Christianity. There's just Christianity. There's no such thing as Hegelian Christianity or Kantian Christianity or progressive or liberal, or there's just Christianity, and it's hard to understand, but at least believe that there's just Christianity or there's not. I think that's his ultimate project. Now, whether I agree or not is a different podcast, but I think that's what he's saying.
So my two parting thoughts, I guess, is having not read the work, but from your description, it very much seems like it's in the Jewish tradition of Midrash.
Yeah.
And I took a Judaic studies class. I took a few Judaic studies class at UMass, and one of them we had to buy the Talmud and the Tanakh in a Jewish translation instead of, a Christian translation, because they're very different. I was actually struck by how different they were when you read like an ESV or an NIV or even the King James, and then you go to some like a full Talmud version that was written by rabbis, translated by rabbis. Some of them are night and day. Well, we read a lot of Midrash, and like the point of Midrash, like some of them were absurd, and like especially when you think about Genesis, they'd be like, Adam was 18 feet tall and he had blue eyes and a size 72 foot, and you're like, what are they trying to get at? But once you sort of let go of rationality, they were very much like fables. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Like no, there wasn't a frog that hopped on a fox's head and the fox didn't talk to get it across the lake. But it's teaching you a lesson, right?
Right.
So it seems very much in that tradition, which is just kind of, that tradition is metaphysical, and it is meant to try to explain, especially some of these absurd stories in the Old Testament. And the rabbis are like, what the heck? Right?
Right. Which is an honest approach.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I think you nailed it there. Right. It is, in fact, Kierkegaard starts off Fear and Trembling with he calls them preludes, but they're 4 different angles on the story of Abraham marching Isaac up the mountain. Mm-hmm. And but they're basically Midrash. That's what Midrash is.
Yeah.
And I just, this is a Hebraic way of approaching truth, as opposed to a Greek way, or as opposed to a modern Enlightenment way.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point of what he's trying to do.
So that's my second to last thought. My final thought is, and we can get into, this is going to be like a cliffhanger later thing. I used to be really into philosophy, and especially the existentialists, and then moved more towards the progressives. And by that, I don't mean what talking heads mean. By progressives, I mean the Metaphysical Club, Chauncey Wright, eventually James and Dewey. But, this whole question of why, it doesn't enamor me anymore. And I think a lot of that has to do with behavioral psychology and genetics. And I don't even know if there's like an answer to why, except that your brain can be manipulated, or this, like these sort of larger metaphysical, ethical questions. I'm just like, it's I don't know. I want to keep it PG, so
You want to keep it what?
PG. So I'm not gonna.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to talk about philosophy.
No. I like it. I do think there's some overlap with behavioral psychology and some science in philosophy. I guess I'm just saying I'm less enamored than I used to be. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think what my enamor has, where I've become more enamored, is like we talked about, like Darren Brown and mentalists and how humans can be manipulated as more powerful questions about meaning and belonging and becoming than sort of Descartes sitting down saying like, all right, how do I know I'm not a Boltzmann brain?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter if you're a Boltzmann brain or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's plenty of room, I think, to talk about all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And from my end, actually, the corresponding philosopher that I think of immediately is Wittgenstein.
I have no clue who that is.
Ludwig Wittgenstein. I'll do a little lecture on him next episode.
Yeah. Does he kill vampires in his spare time?
He wrote two major works in his lifetime. This is a quick summary. The first one, he said he solved philosophy, and that there was no need for it. That there were only practical questions. That everything was math, basically, and that every word could be a symbol, like a sign for one thing, if we wanted it to, and that, you know, we could make language basically like math, and then there would be no more confusion in the world. Like, this word means this, it always means this.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a synonym, it means this. And then, like 20 years later, he wrote a book that was like, my first book was complete BS. And actually, language is a limit, but it's not the end, you know? And so, but like, he didn't, and what he ended up saying was, and I think I agree with Wittgenstein more than I do Kierkegaard these days, but this is something I'm thinking through now. Basically what he said is, like, we need to grow to be okay with the limits of our knowledge. In other words, language can only say what language can say. It can't really tell us about the transcendent, but just because it can't tell us about the transcendent doesn't mean that there's no transcendence. It doesn't mean that there is transcendence either.
Yeah, I'm down with that. I'm going to have to pick up something from him this week. And I would go even further. Like, language shapes the way you think in ways you don't even know. And we're coming up against the clock, but there's sort of...
I agree with that.
Like, there's a reason why German philosophy and Italian philosophy and French philosophy and American philosophy or English philosophy sound so much different.
Yeah.
It's because there are different words and different ways of describing things. And it's why, like, sometimes you read German philosophers and you're like, this is way too dense. But in German, it's not. You know, if you know German, it's easier to understand than some English translation because of how you think when you're speaking German.
Right.
You know, and it's even more evident when you go to the East and you have languages that place, you know, your last name before your first name and think in the collective we versus the individual I, which is why, like, Confucianism and Taoism and Lao Tzu are writing such different things at the same time as, you know, Rome's conquering the world.
Yeah. Let's do it. If I was just wondering, like, if you read the work of English philosophers in German,
If it's...
does it become not boring?
I mean, I don't know. Adam Smith and Bertrand Russell are not boring, in my opinion. Have you read Adam Smith?
Not Smith. I've read a little bit of Russell. I think you have to. Yeah, Russell's not boring. Russell's amusing. Yeah, he's amusing. I wouldn't say he's like engaging. Like I can't put the book down, but he's at least comes off as like he's not snooty. Well, maybe in a certain way.
He's kind of snooty, but
he is kind of snooty, but like not in that "ooh, I'm British" kind of way, you know?
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I mean, he did decide that he needed to refound mathematics and wrote a book to show that 1 + 1 = 2, and it was like 100 and something pages.
Yeah.
Like his project, which he never finished, was like, I'm going to ground mathematics better than anyone else ever has. I'm going to redefine it so that it's not shaky. Like, it takes a little bit of snootiness and arrogance to...
Yeah. Arrogance for sure. But that's all the guys we're talking about. Like, honestly, like to sit down and like write this stuff and like expect that all these guys, I think, thought that they had figured something out. Something that nobody else had figured out before.
Yeah.
Which is just arrogant.
Any final thoughts besides that all philosophers and mathematicians are arrogant?
No, I don't have any final thoughts. I appreciate our time together today, Nate.
Yeah, I hope next week's in person. I think maybe our audience does too.
Oh man, me too. Let's do it.
All right. Have a